Welcome back to Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. Every Monday, you are receiving in your mailbox our conversation with Mike Zuzolo, the president and founder of Global Commodity Analytics. He is an expert who is now bringing us high expectations. How does that work, Mike? How are you?
I'm doing well, Luis. Thank you for having me back. Yeah, I am really hopeful that we can find a continuation of some more price upside now that we are through the month of May. And wow, Luis, what a month for the record books and what a month for history. The price of crude oil, the currencies, the dollar testing some major highs again. In the corn market going down to $3 a bushel, and the fact that we have gone from essentially 25 to 28 cent hogs back up to 40 to 45 cent hogs. I did some quick figuring that just kind of put it into perspective of what we saw in the month of April, and we essentially saw the Brazilian real move about 7.5% stronger this week so far from low to high. And we now have made, as of Thursday's close, a new weekly high in the crude oil. And not only that, but the WTI New York crude oil has literally moved almost $60 a barrel in 1 week. And I think that's where, for the month of April being closed out, we now, it appears to me, have a couple big things going on that we needed desperately. I think there's more optimism on the medical side, and the potential for the COVID-19 treatments are starting to work into the marketplace, that we maybe will be coming out of this sooner rather than later. And I think that was reflected in the energy markets, along with the fact that we did see a drop in ethanol supplies here in the United States and a drop in unleaded gas supplies. So it sure looks to me that we've hit an equilibrium point now in demand meeting supplies, and that was a very crucial factor for the month of April. So the charts for both December corn and November beans are suggesting a buy signal to me on the stochastics, and they look like a double bottom. So that's why, like you say, my expectations are very high for the month of May. We've got to make good out of how we finished out of April, especially with the fact that we do have planting still very much underway in the United States, and weather could be a factor that helps support the prices more.
Other than some states reopening there in America, what other factors are you seeing that could help a better May than April?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I just finished a special report about COVID and about commodities and about the supply chain, and it was a very timely report, about 23 pages long, Luis, and so it took me about 45 days to make it. And what I found in that was that it's not just all about the United States here when it comes to the COVID going away and economic recovery. We need China, we need the rest of Asia, we need South America, and we need the United States, and we need Mexico and Canada. You know, we need all the big agriculture players, including the European Union, to bring this commodity market around, because the commodity market begins and ends with the crude oil market, whether you're talking about the fundamentals and the biofuel side, or whether you're talking about the investment, and whether the market thinks we're inflationary and they're buying commodities because they're excited about the emerging markets again, and therefore they're weaker on the dollar and stronger on the emerging market currencies. So I found in that special report that we were also seeing Europe and Asia starting to come around pretty quickly as well, maybe even faster in some sense than the United States when it comes to beating back the COVID in terms of the number of cases and the number of deaths, which is, certainly just great news given this pandemic.
And what are the exact crops that would be benefiting?
Yeah, another real good question. I think one thing that the special report, it was interesting because before the pandemic, I was telling clients and subscribers that I felt like 2020 could end with the protein markets leading the market in agriculture higher through increased protein demand through cattle and hogs. I started 25 years ago in commodities, Luis, and the first thing I learned as a livestock analyst was the term walking your corn off the field. And that was essentially raising livestock, feeding that livestock your corn and your soy meal, and before the days of compound feed, and essentially making your market from the grain perspective, making it through the livestock market. And so before the pandemic, I felt like the Chinese demand and the rest of Asia's demand and the excess supply of livestock and meat protein here in the United States and Brazil was very necessary, and the demand was very high in other parts of the world. Whether you're talking about Australia not having a cattle supply because of their drought and their liquidation they had to go through in 2019 and 2020, it looked like 2021 was going to be a really good protein year before the pandemic. Well, when I got done with the special report, it was interesting to me because now that we've seen some culling of herds here, some flocks being euthanized in poultry, some pigs, fat pigs, and market-ready pigs being euthanized by producers and packers, it dawned on me that we saw the wholesale prices go sharply higher at the end of April, whether you're talking about hamburger or whether you're talking about hams or whether you're talking about the pork cutout price. And that really turned the livestock futures at the mercantile exchange pretty dramatically as we closed out April. So I actually think 2020 could still be a protein-led turnaround in terms of the demand market. And if we can get the cattle and hog prices back up to profitability, then the grain markets will follow as we get into the first of the next year.
Yeah, that is very compatible with what I heard from a lot of Brazilian sources this week,
Hmm.
because everybody is a bit worried about the corn market, but most are not worried about the meat markets. Um,
Yes. I think the other thing too that is really compelling, and this is why maybe I don't like using the words bullish and bearish, but I know that's part of the moniker that we use in commodities. But something that maybe makes me a little bit more bullish is the fact that when I got done with my analysis, when I try and track what the futures market is pricing in terms of U.S. carryover, when I looked at the corn market at $3 lead month futures, my model that I use would suggest we're already pricing in about a 3.2 billion bushel carryover. So I think, like we talked about last week, I think these prices have been moving in real time with the demand destruction. And so there is some price premium we can put back in if, again, we get that summer grilling season here in the Northern Hemisphere in the United States and the summer driving season. We get those back, and I think the market's tapping into that now. If we can get those back completely, then I think we do have some price premium that we can put back in since this commodity market's running so real time.
yeah, one interesting fact to add is that some areas of southern Brazil, like Paraná and Mato Grosso do Sul, are getting dry, so that will be affecting the Brazilian second corn crop. So
Are
that,
you tasseling down there yet in that area or pollinating?
yeah, the dry is already seen in Mato Grosso do Sul and Paraná, not yet in Mato Grosso.
And that's the number one safrina crop province, correct?
Yes. So, Mike, and what about the planting in the USA?
Yeah, I think we're going to slow down a bit. I've been hearing from clients in the Great Lakes states, so east of the Mississippi River, closer to Lake Michigan, that the colder temperatures we've been seeing probably will slow us down late this week and I think almost certainly into this coming weekend and early next week. There's actually some frost scare temperatures on some models right now for the middle of next week. So we made that very big advance in the planting that you and I had talked about last week. That came through pretty nicely. But I would say this coming week, I'd be surprised if corn and bean plantings advanced more than 10% each. just because we're already getting wetter and we're already getting colder as we get into the second half of this week.
Yes. And one thing that I forgot to mention last week was to ask you about the wheat market. It's really interesting what some analysts are saying about the midterm forecast in general macroeconomics that this pandemic will leave us. Some are saying that we will have less of free markets. Russia firstly banned wheat exports, but right now they are reopening. What can you tell us about the wheat market right now?
Yeah, the wheat market is going to be very interesting in the month of May. It will be a very big player in terms of how the corn and beans do because of what you're talking about and those macro economic forces and the competitiveness of other countries besides Brazil and the United States, the Baltic states, essentially. What I feel is happening in Russia right now is that they are forced essentially to sell more wheat that they probably don't want to sell into the export market because their flour and bread prices are starting to get too high domestically, but they're being forced to because of the crude oil market, Luis. They have to be an exporter of commodities in order to keep their budget intact and their economy intact. So I think they're in a bad position, whether you're talking about Russia or the Ukraine or Romania, that they're going to be forced into selling more in the export market as long as oil stays sub $20, sub $25 a barrel in London, in the Brent market. And we're back almost to $25. So they may want to stop selling and exporting wheat if their currencies do indeed come in and appreciate. And also if the Brent crude oil prices get back above $25 a barrel. Here in the United States, we are essentially in the hard red wheat country, Kansas, Oklahoma, still very, very dry, but I think the crop conditions being no better than they were last year now after this past week's cuts in the ratings have factored in pretty much all of the bad crop at this point. Doesn't mean it can't get worse with more dry weather. So here again, I think the month of May in the United States is going to determine our wheat crop because we've got a lot of thin stands. If we get rain, they can tiller out and regenerate and give us some more bushels. But if we don't get rain, it's going to stay very, very thin all the way into harvest.
Yeah, so one thing one dispute, I should say, that should grow and should interest Americans is that Argentina has been growingly with tensions with Brazil. Well, we have a very far right president in Brazil and a very far left president in Argentina. And what happened during this week is that Argentina announced that they would leave all future negotiations related to the Mercosur with other blocs or countries for future trade agreements. So that puts Brazil in a very complicated situation because they want to sell a lot to Argentina, but it's basically that Argentina is almost out of the Mercosur. The current administration don't like a lot of free markets, and basically the Brazilian administration wants to trade with everybody. So that can mean opportunities for U.S. wheat in the Brazilian market.
That's interesting you say that because I noticed this past week while the Brazilian real was finding a lot of support and a lot of buying, the Argentine peso remains at a record low. I think the market is starting to signal more and more to me that they're very nervous. The currency markets are very nervous about an Argentine default once we come out of this pandemic, similar to what we experienced back in 2001. So it's something. Thank you for bringing that up. My clients, my farmer and elevator clients that enjoy this channel will be very eager to hear what you just had to say. Thank you for that.
Yes, Brazil imports more than 5 million metric tons of wheat. If there is any problem with Argentina, U.S. farmers indeed would be benefited.
Well, in Argentina's peso continuing to weaken when they already had a short wheat crop, and it looks like a shorter corn crop is probably going to keep them very nervous about their domestic prices being too inflated and being too high. And that's been a concern for the past several years in Argentina, in particular with their inflation rate.
Yeah, Mike, is there anything else would you like to add?
I think the only thing I would add at this point is from a standpoint of where we're at going into May, if we can not find any new bearish news fundamentally, Luis, I would think that we are in a situation where the currencies maybe will want to break the dollar back. It was interesting to me this week that we are testing a major support at around the 98.80 level. And then right below that at 98.30 are the March lows for the US dollar index. If we could take those March lows out, that to me would mean psychologically the trade is starting to think more pre-pandemic again. Before all this hit and hurt the global economy, the trade's starting to unwind that nervous deflationary mindset. So I think, again, the month of May will probably present itself a very interesting month, the currencies along with everything else.
Mike, thanks again for your time. Don't forget to subscribe, and let's see you next week.
Thank you, Luis. Have a great week.